welcome back to my garden. And an especially warm welcome because this is an auspicious occasion. Episode number 200. I've spent the last week racking my brains about the content. What could possibly mark such an auspicious landmark occasion? What a milestone. And I'm quite proud of it. And eventually I thought, well, perhaps I could just do a video talking about, reflecting upon the previous 199 videos. This body of work, this series of chats in the garden where I tell stories, sometimes with a bit of a quirky, philosophical sort of take on life, sometimes talking about my own desperate attempts to develop personally, my own struggles and so forth, and perhaps sharing something that might be of use to you. And it struck me while I was thinking that if that's what these 199 episodes have been, wouldn't episode number 200, talking about the previous 199 episodes, actually be an episode at all? Or would it be something else entirely? And I have made other films that don't sit into the 199 episodes so far. Would this be one of those? And actually during the week I received in my YouTube algorithmic sort of suggestion box one of these mathematical explorations about a very profound idea that shook the foundations of mathematics at the beginning of the 20th century. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And it struck me that, well, there we have it. This is a very interesting parallel to the situation I find myself. Now, I've spoken, and as so often I say, I've spoken about this before, but let me just recap in case you've forgotten or dozed off in that episode or simply never saw it. Back at the beginning of the 20th century, the world's most famous mathematician at an enormous mathematical conference, David Hilbert, German mathematician, posed a series of what he considered to be the most important questions that mathematics as a community needed to tackle in the forthcoming century. Excuse the hand waving, that's something else I so often say. But anyway, one of the questions was about proving the correctness, the completeness of mathematics as a subject, its consistency. So David Hilbert set out this challenge, and how would you even begin to do that? But actually, a couple of decades later, someone did come up with an answer, and a rather shocking one at that. And this built on the first really solid attempt to put mathematics on sound foundations. Again, something I've spoken about before. Russell and Whitehead, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead, and their astonishing book, Principia Mathematica, 3 volumes, which takes over 300 pages just to prove that 1 + 1 is indeed 2. But they prove it from the very bottom up, establishing totally rigorous foundations of what a number is and so forth, and what it all might mean. And they do it by talking about sets, those things with those funny curly brackets, and collections of objects, which might be infinite collections. And one day, at the beginning of the 20th century, towards the beginning of the 20th century, Russell was pondering various questions connected to these ideas of set theory. And he came up with a rather nasty paradox. And essentially the formulation is something like this. X is an element of the set if, and only if, it isn't an element of the set. It's in it only if it isn't in it. Now, his original formulation was of a set, which is a collection of sets, and all the sets that go into it are sets that are also collections of sets and don't include themselves. So the question would be, would the set of all the sets that don't include themselves include itself? And it turns out that if it doesn't include itself, well, it should. And if it does include itself, it shouldn't. And it's a sort of logical paradox, self-reference, twisting back on itself and destroying its own foundations. As teachers, maths teachers, this is what I would say. When I was talking about more philosophical ideas within mathematics to my senior students, a good way of explaining this would be the wonderful linguistic version of this, the sentence, all teachers are liars. And of course, I'm a teacher, which means I'm a liar, which means the sentence is false, which means I'm not a liar, I tell the truth, in which case I am a liar. And round you go. As my father would put it, disappearing up your own orifice. Charming, Dad, charming. Anyway, Bertrand Russell was struck by the fact that this was not just a little bit of a gimmicky word game. It actually was a foundational problem, and eventually mathematics resolved it by simply banning those kinds of objects. You don't fit in, so we won't play with you anymore, was the strategy, which is not entirely satisfactory. But it was necessary because around about 1920, 1930, in that sort of ballpark figure, perhaps the 20s, the Austrian logician and deep thinker, Kurt Gödel, came up with a formulation where he sort of codified all of mathematical knowledge and found a very clever way of embedding this paradox into all of mathematical knowledge. And essentially the conclusion that you were compelled to draw was that within mathematics there would be statements that could be neither proven nor disproven. And worse still, there was no real way of identifying what those statements were in advance, in a sort of definitive way, which wasn't a nice place for mathematicians to find themselves, because you could spend decades trying to prove something that was quite literally unprovable. So that's a difficult one. And I know that my dilemma about whether a summary video as episode 200 is not exactly the same thing, but it did kind of remind me of that type of problem, where you try and do something, and in trying to do it, you don't do it. Or you change the thing itself. I mean, physics has a problem like that. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And I'm going to mangle this, as I always do, and I never studied physics at university, so this is very much a layman's oversimplified take. But we have a problem with subatomic particles, that you cannot determine its position, a particle's position, and its momentum at the same time. Momentum being sort of mass and movement combined, sort of directional force. Because if you determine its position, you do so, I suppose, by firing particles at it, and you change its momentum. And if you determine its momentum accurately, you change its position. So it's a real catch-22, as Joseph Heller kind of alluded to in his wonderful book of the same title. And that seems to me my dilemma. If I make a video summarizing the videos, is it a video? It is, but it isn't. I know it's not the same, but it's what I started thinking about. So I'm going to excuse myself the logical inequivalence. Another twist in that tale. But it did strike me when I started thinking about that actually that's something that we face with so much of what we're doing in the sort of personal development, self-improvement sort of world. For example, if you want to become a truly productive person, use your time to the absolute maximum benefit. The way to do it is by doing something that is not using your time to its absolute maximum benefit, or is it, in another way of looking at it, totally unproductive. As students, you might relate to this. I certainly can. You realise you haven't studied for the end of year final, so the first thing you do is you start making a study timetable and program. Of course, the one thing that isn't is studying. How do we get around those sorts of dilemmas? I guess it's a bit like the uncertainty principle. When we're faced with the impossibility to do this perfectly, we work out what our limits of tolerance are. We determine position and momentum, not exactly, but near enough. This video isn't a sort of new one in the series, but it isn't exactly not one in the series. It's in a kind of comfortable space in between. And it's sort of how I feel a little bit about these videos as well. They are in a comfortable space in between. What is my purpose? What am I trying to do? Trying to reach out and meet people in my attempt at summarizing. Well, one thing I thought of doing was just doing the donkey work, but I got as far as writing the numbers 1 to 200, leaving sort of a 3-line space to write little summaries to try and get some kind of overview. Of course, I got no further than that. It's a bit like my not deep dive into the Zettelkasten method. A great idea, but one that ultimately I didn't actually do. It does remain my best ever self-improvement video. So my best self-improvement video, near enough 11,000 views, and I never actually did it. So it didn't really improve myself at all, which would make it the quintessential self-improvement video, because my general suspicion with those is the one self that they improve are not the selves watching it. It's the self banking the income and selling the heavily discounted electronic courses. Time sensitive, except they never are, because the sale keeps on coming round. So there we are. This is episode 200. Much ado about nothing, perhaps you might say. Neil, what was the content of all that? You just went around in a big circle, which I suppose is the very stuff of our lives. So there we are. Make of it what you will. Maybe next week, an idea will have popped into my head that is a little bit more constructive, that points me in a direction for the next 200 episodes. I don't know. Time will tell. Tune in next week and you'll find out. Till then, trust your lives are filled with joy, and from sunny Brazil, a happy 200th episode. Ciao.